My name's Glyn Pooley, and I'd like to talk about art. This time, my subject is...
So we're going to have a look at Cubism this evening, and we're going a little bit pre-Cubism to give us a little bit background first to the work of Paul Cezanne, who was obviously known as a post-impressionist painter, but he was a kind of forerunner. And you can see in this painting of the quarry that there's Cubist elements in it. The little the square is being in evidence, or a little cube. Paul Cezanne was kind of an artist which broke the mold in terms of perception and what an artist could possibly include on their canvas, in terms of moving from the traditional one-point focus, which had become very prominent since the Renaissance times with the illusionism or perspective and figurative naturalism. And he wanted to kind of give the artist the opportunity to observe changing effects and time presentation in his canvas. So he would spend all day making these images, and sometimes over many weeks and months, and go back to the same place and observe it under different lighting conditions, and then record that in the same artwork. So these little marks that he's kind of putting into his canvas, maybe he's looking at that tree over a number of different days, and some days it's quite light and another day it's quite dark, and he superimposes one over the other. So it's multiple options there, which of course is something which the Cubists develop, because they're moving in a direction of giving the artist a little bit more freedom. He also championed the idea of breaking everything down into a cube, a cylinder shape, or a sphere, so that the flatness of the canvas could be overcome. And that will make more sense when we look at the Cubist pictures. But this is another good example of Paul Cezanne. Just before Cubism started to emerge, he's looking at this mountain, Mount Saint Victoire, which he painted over and over and over. As I said, in lots of different lighting conditions. And if you've been in front of these pictures, some of them like this, they are quite large works. And you can see him analysing different clouds, formations, going over and breaking them down into tone and shape. So each of these kind of marks would be in a cloud that he saw tonally as it moved across the sky. And, you know, this is... So he's developing a cohesion in the picture with the language, with the kind of marks that he's using, but he's presenting those multiple moments, if you like. He also starts to play around with perspective on the buildings as well, where you can see simultaneously the left of the building and the right of the building. And the cube was a good example and a good way of portraying that, because you can take it as a kind of element that can be cohesively put together, that can show the vertical, horizontal, and depth simultaneously. So you can see kind of cubist little cubes starting to appear in these pictures, squares and cubes, which can, as I say, reveal things from different viewpoints. And then the famous leap into early Cubism, or proto-Cubism as it's called, is this Picasso picture, the Demoiselle d'Avignon. But Picasso now takes the angularity of Cezanne into figures, but his interest, of course, is also in Iberian culture and African masks, which are ways of overlaying extra information in a picture. So you can bring in different cultures. So, for example, if this had been a straightforward interpretation, say a nude or a semi-nude portrait of someone, say, in the studio, you're going to get a representation of a certain person in time and space, which would have been up until that point pretty contemporary. But then he's put on them the image of an African mask with all the connotations that brings with it. And we've looked at African masks and culture a little bit in some of our presentations. And of course, often they have a spiritual dimension and a historical dimension and other sub-meanings within the community, their communities. And then when you bring them into the Western community, civilization, if you like, in a way, they take on other concepts, ideas, and forms. So he's basically blending different cultures together, and he's using a shared language to give them a certain kind of unity. And it's moving more and more towards the abstract. We're not seeing what the eye just sees, although we can read these as figures. We're starting to read them in terms of abstract forms, which can symbolize and mean something else. And the founder of Cubism, if you like, there was two. There was Picasso and George Broque, as you see here. Now, if you can see the guitar in there, you've done well. There's a bit of help in the center of the sound hole of the guitar, an indication towards strings, etc. But they're using this shared language of the cube, the cylinder, as we saw, and the fractured sphere that we mentioned earlier with Cezanne. But they're using tone in a way which will add a little bit of depth to the picture. So there's a sense of perspective in it, but it's done using tone more than the specific, the one-pointed perspective version that mainly ran up to this period. To make it easier to understand in terms of the objects which were being portrayed, in the early stages of Cubism, they took away most of the color. So they're more tonal, so that you see these browns and ochre kind of colors are there. And that enables us to see these shapes and to investigate them a little bit more clearly. You're also starting to see, this is the first image, but you'll find that music is a theme which Cubism embrace a lot. That's mainly because Cubism was also interested in the time aspect in a picture. How do you portray time, the time experience, and time passing? So you get these kind of repeated forms happening, and the way if you like, their closeness together gives an indication of the kind of music that is being played there. But it also gives a spatial development, a spatial element, which gives us a sense of perspective. And then we've got this other early phase Cubist picture by Broque, whereby we've got playing cards. You can see them just about there, and a candlestick just about there on a table. Can you work out where the table is? I'll give you 5 minutes, but yeah, there's the edge of the table there. Okay, running through. So yeah, we can pick out those elements, and we can see how those multiple perspectives are being shown. See, in one position, the table top, if you like, there, we're looking down on the candle. There, we're looking straight onto it, and the cards again, they are floating above the top of the table, but they are there from a different viewpoint again. The fact that they're up at a certain angle there can give us, when we step into this language, we could think, well, maybe those cards have actually been picked up by the card player themselves, moved around even, because we see the card player hinted at with their face there. It's hinted an eye and a mouth. And all this action, if you like, is going on within this unusual space. And we mentioned time in the picture. To make the picture a little bit more ambiguous, the artists were using, rather than a rectangle as their canvas, or portrait format, or landscape format, which most paintings were painted on. They've chosen the oval to disorientate us, really, because time works in unusual ways. Sometimes there's this talk that it is a cyclical process, but by disorientating us, it gives us an opportunity to consider more deeply our experience of if we decided to play cards on a table. And we couldn't escape time passing, and we also couldn't escape gazing around that arena and seeing and spotting these different things. And just the action of gazing around, time is passing. So things are coming towards us and things are receding from us. So that level of ambiguity just gives us an opportunity to think slightly differently by changing the canvas shape. And this is one in the same early style by Picasso. Obviously, Picasso was a prodigious artist who had an amazing ability to portray form, both figuratively and in this case, towards the abstract. So he's very good at achieving this extra depth, and his pictures often achieve a little bit more depth and painterliness than Braque. But nevertheless, they're using a similar kind of language. We get the also added aspect with these painters now, considering that light, how light is falling on different planes. It doesn't have to be fixed. It doesn't have to be just one plane. The light source in a painting, in a Cubist picture, doesn't just have to come from one direction, say for down in that way. It can come in a number of directions. It can come down that way, or it can come across from the right or from the left, or even up in a picture. And that's again a little bit more out like our experience. When we look around a scene, the light sources are often multiple, aren't they? For example, in a room, they might come from a light above you. They might come from the window as well on your right or left, or there might be a lamp to the left or right of you. And these artists were trying to give the impression that all these things can come into your view and put them on the picture plane. If they hadn't worked out a system to do this, which is this cohesive Cubist language, it would have all just turned into a riot mess. But doing it like this, it gives us an opportunity to investigate all those different aspects in an environment that kind of visually works. There's another one by Picasso, this seated nude. The more time you spend with them and start exploring them, the more interesting they become, really. Because we look on this picture and we can see this head and then the torso and going down towards the legs, and then you can see the arm to the left arm to the right arm coming across there. But like we said, we get this sense of light coming in a little bit on that direction, but there's also nuances of light appearing around the surfaces as well, other surfaces as well. And there's that space is created because of the reflection of the planes. But we go in and out of space, if you like. We go simultaneously to the front and to the back. We can move seamlessly between those different planes, which is more akin to our experience when we're in an environment with someone. You can also see the arms of the chair here appearing. It's one arm that side and one arm that side. And then, you probably find other things as well. Doorways, windows, window spaces, etc. And that reveals a deeper level of connection with the actual space the sitter is in. And the Cubist element, of course, in this one is really taken to another more clear level, shall we say. As well as those interior scenes that we just saw, Robert Delonay here, who with his wife Sonia became famous for an art movement called Orphism, which abstract color forms. They took up Cubism, of course, because it was part of the avant-garde at the time. And you can see these little cubes all just kind of indicated around in these light forces which come down through the picture. They also kind of look like drapes, don't they, coming down either side. So you could be looking at this village through a window even, and seeing that light come down. And then the village, we're kind of, on one level, we're looking down on it with their rooftops and their windows. But in other parts, the perspective again, these little mini perspectives are changing. So he hasn't gone entirely abstract. Of course, we can actually make sense of what is there, but it's fragmented. I think this fragmentation is a key element to Cubism, which becomes, ironically, is becoming more relevant to the contemporary art that we're seeing now. We've gone through a phase where we've had digital art and pixelization and things like that. And these look like little pixels on the screen, don't they? Although this was 1910. Little pixels or like little checkerboards. And they all are open to interpretation. These are just analyzing different points of time and space moving across a surface and different lights, or as a different light hits it. So lights, and in this case some colors as well. So if you go from morning to evening, you see how the time will pass, and the artist can include on the side of their building tones from the morning and tones from the evening. Once we take into the cohesion of this cubist structure, and then they become more and more interesting. It's a bit more peaceful in that one, isn't it? Jean Metzinger, another avant-garde painter of this period, a critic and poet as well, actually, and his interpretation of a village. Clearly see the multiple viewpoints here, where we're definitely looking down on the side of this building, and its sense of scale, and then we scan up and we see the perspective completely change there, and then we look to the left and we're seeing the left-hand side of that building, the right-hand side of that building. It's like as if we've just turned our head in the scene, and he's put the two together. But we've got this lovely cohesion because of the angularity, and of course the tones in this as well. It creates quite a lot of perspective through the use of tones. See the light kind of emanating, going towards the center there, as the cubes get a little bit smaller and smaller generally. So there's a hint towards the perspectral language. The size of the marks of cubes and cylinders smaller and smaller, and we go pushed into the background space. But, it's a kind of very modern language, really. And this is an interesting one because seeing as how Cubism influenced the other movements that were going to come on in the 20th century. This is Marcel Duchamp, of course, who became famous for his ready-made artworks and sculptures that were, parts of the surrealist movement. But here he's exploring the roots of surrealism. And the roots of surrealism are in the different dimensions, if you like, of the world we find ourselves in. These artists were particularly picking up on the elements that I've discussed in terms of the shape and form and light, but they were including the so-called fourth dimension as well, which is element of time. And that's probably why we get so many musical images, because music relies on time, and it relies on the sounds and the space between sounds, and it's the space between which these artists are also particularly interested in. So he's taken a blend of, he hasn't gone as cubist, if you like, as maybe Braque and Picasso had, even though he's in 1911. Not totally, geometric, although we quite obviously see geometric shapes here, but he's holding a little bit more onto figuration of what the eye might see. We can quite clearly see these figures in some kind of space with modeling involved in it. But we do pick up on kind of a rhythm between them and that spatial dimension between them and that blending or blurring and flattening of the picture plane, where at one point one figure comes in front of the other, and then as we scan across the picture they start to recede as well, and that's the geometry enables us to do that. Sometimes Cubism at this phase has been described as perceiving a diagram, really, diagram of all these different facets that you might pick up on a scene that's in front of you. So you can imagine yourself in a room drawing some people playing some musical instruments, and you would think about the key elements that are included in that scenario, the figures themselves, the musical instruments, of course, and the space they were in. In terms of diagram, you'd make a list of all these things. You could prioritize that list, and then you could include them in your picture in a way that enabled them to kind of have an equanimity, so that you'd gaze across the scene and not just have one prominent character which you were drawn to straight away, but you'd have figures that would come into your focus and then recede from your focus. And that kind of is alluding to, or artists were trying to get into their pictures, that notion of perception. When we look into a scene, our sense of being in that situation changes moment by moment. It doesn't just fix itself. We have our own different thought processes. One moment we might like what we see, the next moment we might not like what we see. The next moment we might feel happy about a scene, or we might feel a little bit sad about the scene. There's lots of different things going on in the viewer, and these artists were trying to offer a way of showing these different elements in it, or giving the viewer an opportunity to explore those elements when they saw the image that was in front of them. And they weren't trying to be too dictatorial, so dictatorial in what you look at and when you look at it and fix it down. They're trying to get an element of fluidity. You get this kind of fluidity evolving. The Lady Rider is definitely got a sense now of a movement through this kind of repeated pattern, and you could see how this was moving towards that famous, mainly Italian movement, futurism, which started to pick up in the early part of the 20th century. So during the war and after the war, mainly after the First World War, when things became more and more mechanical and started to speed up. So the sense of things speeding up, the sense of things gathering a kind of momentum, is something which Cubism gives an opportunity to show and explore. That's why I think it's sometimes quite relevant for the kind of art that we can do today, where we've gone through a phase where things have really sped up quite drastically through computer technology, information technology, phones, etc., etc. And we're still finding it difficult to kind of bring it into our lives in a way that can kind of be able to handle the sheer amount of stimulus that has been thrown at us. And Cubism is a way of kind of reflecting on that, so we can prioritize that sense of stimulus, if you like, and its intensity. We can give it, high frequency by high repetition, or we can start to give it some space by these shapes and forms which are further apart, which are larger and maybe a little bit flatter. And we see Cubism evolve in that way. It's also nice to explore, as I said, these kinds of pictures and find out, what is actually in them in terms of the imagery. So after you've seen this presentation, maybe have a look at it again, enlarge the pictures, and just see what you can find in it. We can obviously see the main figure there, and we can see like top of this vase looking down, and we can see some plants, different kinds of plants. But you'll be able to see more. You start to, like, the horse's mane is there, etc. But yeah, investigate it. And think about it. Does it give you this feeling almost as well, even though it's got angularity to it, as if this rider is going up and down on this horse, And maybe it has. So yeah, explore that. This is a nice, interesting one, I think, as well. When you first look, some of these pictures are quite large, and that gives them extra impact. But yeah, the smokers by Leger. Imagine these plumes of smoke just kind of rising up in the scene. And then we notice the heads of the figures with their cigarettes in their mouth there. But then we've got the village or the town in the background, again with this kind of flattening of the perspective and an equanimity in terms of how the hierarchy of the different elements of the picture are included. So you can imagine these smokers walking through the village, and their smoke going up into the atmosphere. We can easily read these as trees, of course, as well. He's hinted at them with a touch of green, but it's more to do with the shape and all those multiple perspectives. You got a rhythm to it as well that we just saw in Metzinger's picture. So we get a sense of how these figures are moving through this scene as well. Are they running through it, or are they strolling through it? So the number of marks, the size of marks you use, the repeated aspect of those marks can give us an impression that someone's running through a scene or they're walking leisurely through it. And this language enables us to kind of do it once we step into it. And then another one, Gleizes, he's portrayed of football players here. You can see there's a lot of movement again there. Interesting light sources as well, light planes in the piece suggest these different perspectives. But when we notice these figures start coming out, the one there holding the ball with his leg, walking, coming towards us. And you've got another one here going in that direction, overlaid with this one. Another figure there. The one over here, an arm pulling onto this one, and the figure there. Yeah, the action is all there, and the figure down here, different place, different perspective completely. But in the scene, smaller figures, bigger figures, just like we would experience. We were painting a football scene up to this point, or anything. It's about action, isn't it? And our perception is people come running towards us and running away, a bit like a film, a stop animation, if you like, and picking up those different points on the film where we can see the sense of time passing and being involved with the scene rather than being a slightly distant viewer from that singular perspective. And yeah, this language enables us to see that. Different perspectives for the buildings in the background as well. Slightly smaller marks, so they suggest a sense of scale there. But we got buildings up there, shape, size of the buildings, impression of the ironwork there, and we got buildings down here as well. Sometimes we're looking down on the buildings, sometimes we're looking up, sometimes they're near, sometimes they're far. As we turn our head, as we change our focus in real life, commas, so these artists are using and portraying that in their pictures. And then we move on to the next stage, if you like, of Cubism, whereby they call this synthetic Cubism, where the art starts to use actual objects. And Picasso was used, of course, a piece of old rope there. We talked about the oval aspect, didn't we, to disorientate us and enable us to kind of step into this other world. But we also see that we're using collage here as well. Photo montage and collage, whereby these different objects pasted onto the surface, printed objects, and the rope is attached to this wooden oval, thick piece of wood as well, all to aid our interest into getting into that scene. Trying to just make it a little bit more real, a little bit more physical in this case. Imagining that piece of rope being in that room. Imagine that wicker top of that chair actually being there. And, we're getting these different perspectives again, looking down from the top of the chair there, and then we're looking onto the objects on the still life on the table with this candle again and with these bits of fruit here, hinting at the newspaper, the journal, which is being read as well. It's just quite an exciting movement. It enables us to coalesce all these different ideas and feelings and experiences that we see when we observe a scene and place them all together. This is a nice one of a man on a balcony. We get this rhythm running through figure, which repeats itself in the landscape at the distance as well. In the distance, we get this balcony shape coming through there and here, which then runs into the man himself as well. As I said, there's an equanimity in terms of the imagery which is being portrayed and used. So it's our choice whether we focus in on the figure, or whether we focus in on the balcony, or we focus in on the landscape as we scan the whole image. We haven't just got to do just what the artist wants in that respect, or the photographer, of course, which was becoming more and more prominent in these particular times. We're experiencing it in a different kind of way. Lovely rhythm running through the piece again, to enable us to kind of investigate all aspects of it. And then Juan Gris, portrait of Picasso, 1912. And you can see this actually does look like Picasso from the photographs that we've seen. At the time, he had that mop of dark hair. He's got this face and this figure, which is kind of active, rhythmic vibration to it. And, we can make out this energy force that is sat, this presence that is sat in front of us. And it's interesting to see how the perspective is kind of coming into us, coming towards us, and going away from us simultaneously. And that's what a cube can kind of do. We start to see that we get that opportunity to change that time spatial element. So Picasso's there's a dynamic force, if you like. And we said this, that the diagonal is one of the most dynamic shapes and directions, of course, in our painting, to move a viewer from one point to another. So if you have repeated diagonals, of course, you get a real sense of energy and force coming down and around, in this case, the portrait of the artist. Very interesting. And then Robert Delonay, we looked at him before. In terms of this time, he's taken it into a much more abstract color emphasis. Yes, there's Cubist shapes and forms here now, but color is becoming stronger for him. Simultaneous windows on a city. That's interesting, isn't it? You've got these. You can see he's engaged and used the frame of the picture here, and then the actual center of the painting, if you like, is this wooden block, and of course that reflects on this window. But they're almost like seamlessly apart, connected. They're apart and they're connected. I like apart and connected. So we move into one area and then move out to another. We move into what would have been an imagined creative space of the painting, out towards its frame, which has got a physicality. And of course, that can be the window frame, a window frame, amongst multiple other window frames, many, many frames. And then when you step into that cube, of course, you go into a distance, or you can come forward. So you go into deep space, or you come to a near foreground, all simultaneously, moving from one to the other. So it's not just a decorative form. It gives us an opportunity to get closer to the experience of gazing through a window, particularly if we were looking out onto the city, because there would be lots of different distances between different objects in there, and our eye would be scanning across the scene and focusing on things at different perspectral levels. So the artist has brought all those together for us to have an opportunity to explore them, and we can go in and out, in and out. And then the card player, by Picasso. We're moving into the third phase, later phase now for Cubism, which is the later synthetic phase where we've got these, objects which are collaged on and in, as we saw earlier, but with areas which become much more flatter now. When we saw the early ones, there was lots of little cubes in them, wasn't there? That was the so-called analytical phase, and now they're becoming a little bit broader. But all the components are there. It's a lovely. They become like jigsaw puzzles now. I think we could say that we can piece together. So in this one, of course, we can see the figure, we can see the cards, we can see the pattern on the dado rail. In the room itself, we can actually see texturization of a surface to actually look like floorboards, or look like wood that was painted on the surface of a door, which painters and decorators used to use years ago to give you simulate oak paneling. It's a lot cheaper on hardboard. And Picasso uses that in the painting, and it might have well been in that room, so get to see that. You also get to see the drawing as well, drawing on the paper. So he's like doing the sketches, and that's included in the picture. So the process of the artist making the piece is also being shown in this kind of way of exploring the visual. And we have a sense of light coming through on one side of the picture, and then we go into deep space, into the dark, like as if we're going into another place or another room. Some things we get to see sometimes because the light is on it. Sometimes they're in the dark part of the room, not enough light on it, so we can't see it. Sometimes we want to explore the dark part, and sometimes we want to see the light part. But that's how rooms are, aren't they? And that's how life is. So we get a chance to see all these things simultaneously in these pictures. We also get the head looking in lots of different directions simultaneously. We've got one eye looking towards us straight out. We've got one 90 degrees, you turn your head, so he's on a different plane altogether. We've got the nose cutting across the two of them, linking them up. So it's like as if that figure has looked at us, and then time's passed, and then they tilted their head away from us, and then they put it back up. That's what happens. That's what people do. So we get to see the multiple actions moving through time presented on that picture plane for us. It's far-reaching, as you can see, Cubism. And this is Diego Rivera, the Mexican mural artist. I put it in because he did use this Cubist method a lot for his large murals. You can imagine when you're making large mural paintings, you want to portray lots of different kinds of information because your audience is so vast and varied, and usually the scale is quite large as well. So he used it to put multiple layers of meanings in his mural pictures. But you can see all those things I just described are taking place in this picture of the writer, who's a Spanish writer, certainly. And you can see him there, hard at his work, and the works that he was writing. But we also get the impression that the light is shining down from this torch on the lamp, shall I say, on his table, lighting these areas up. But we also got light on his face as well. Got a figure in the background looking onto the scene, and then we're part of this scene, looking at every single aspect of it. Some of his notepads, some of his books, some of his writing, some of the landscape in the background, some of the objects in the room, some of the wallpaper which is there, some of the other smaller little objects. All these things are just tied in with it. Got his tie, which is changing as we look at it, from the dark side to the light side. In the dark, we can't see the pattern. In the light side, we can see the pattern. And we get this very active experience with Cubist paintings once we get engaged with it. They become, I don't know, more three-dimensional. Our imagination seems to piece the fragments together. The more time we sit with them, and they become stronger and stronger. So this is something you can bring into your own artwork. You can bring into this multiple dimension to it, and you can think about figures passing through time and space and simultaneously showing them from multiple angles. When we first look at that, we look at this eye's kind of looking straight out towards us, but then we look again more subtly and we see we've got the right eye and the nose is looking at a 3/4 angle, but then we've got this whole of the head here, this plane. This is now the right hand side of the face that's lit up from the right hand direction. So 2 eyes, nose, and a mouth. So it's looking light shining on it from that direction. And when we just break it down and go into the center, light is also simultaneously shining down in that direction. And that's how people are. They move. They create that deeper sense of reality in that respect. So something which seems quite abstract on the surface, Cubist, becomes, when you engage with it, something deeply realistic. Now, Metzinger, of course, First World War going on this time now, and that had a big impact on some of these artists, particularly Braque, unfortunately, who got injured. But that turned the world on its head in lots of ways, in terms of, with all that stuff raging around them, how could these artists make sense of the experience? So this multiple dimensioning of the experience became more important as well. So the soldier would be playing chess because there's strategy, there's deep thinking in it. And of course, Cubism has got an element of that. As I said, they're like puzzles, they're visual puzzles pieced together. As I said, diagrams that kind of all work together. You get all these different components and you put them together, and then they come alive in these kinds of different ways that we've been talking about. Pattern is important. We saw this kind of checkerboard kind of imagery in the landscape of the village earlier as well, and you can see how it creates cubist space. But symbolism and iconic symbols are also included in Cubism as well. We saw it in the early aspect of Picasso with his masks, but we're seeing it in the chess pieces there, with the knights, the queens, the kings, and the bishops. They've all got other connotations, if you like, and we bring those other connotations to the scene when we experience these different things, if we stay sensitive and open to these possibilities. Juan Gris again. I find this a fascinating picture. Yes, it's a portrait of Josette in a scene, but gosh, something about the colours and the tones that make it kind of ethereal. The light source is shining on to her, lighting her, and rather than her becoming more substantial and her presence becoming really kind of heavy and solid, she becomes almost transparent. And you get this impression of the figure is there but not there. They are kind of, we're looking down on them from one perspective, and at the same time we're seeing their shadow cast in the background. So their shadow is almost as important as they are. And that transient nature of our experience comes through in it as well. Very clever use of her setting in the room, flattening that space, adds to this sense of what is the priority, the figure or the shadow? What's substantial? And we all have two aspects to our sense of living in the world as well, don't we? Prominent sides, shadow sides, levels of connotations which we put value judgments on as good, bad, happy, sad, etc. All these things are offered in these pictures, and there's space to kind of engage with them. Fascinating. And another multiple image fascinating one, of course, here, where colour's taken a really leap forward. We get to see this table top. We get to see the window when we're looking through there. I love the carpet at the bottom, the rug, I feel like. Interesting because it almost looks like a Mayan rug because of the squareness of it. And that is something which would then take us to a different culture. And that multiple cultural element is, again, how we receive our experience of the world. We are mixed culture because we're mixed experience. We bring all our heritage together. Maybe some of us are Welsh with a Welsh history, English history, European history, world citizen, the world history. We might spend a lot of time in Africa. So we bring that element into our experience of looking and being, engaging with the world. And these artists want to say, this is all possible, and we can see all these things in the picture. We're not one-dimensional. We are fragmented, fractious. We've got simultaneously all these elements brought together in our moments as we view these artworks. Severini, accordion player, game music, running through the rhythm of the accordion. It's got this kind of accordion-esque look to it. He's taken the shape of the accordion and he's just repeated that around the whole kind of scene. Elements are coming towards us, elements are receding. Some of the aspects of the accordion, like the notes on it, on the accordion, but they're also engaged in the background. Sometimes when you stare at something very hard, you get kind of like an afterglow image, an after image. You get that when you look at a screen often. So you can look at something really intensely, and then you look away, and that thing you just looked at is still as a kind of ghost image in your vision when you look at another aspect. And the artist is kind of doing that here, staring at the accordion, and then he looked away, and in the background you've got the imprint, if you like, of what they've intensely looked at being shown as well. So it gives us another insight into the way we experience our visual perception. Interesting editing information of the head there. We got this kind of outline of a hat. That's all it is. And it's there though, and it's kind of pushed into the background. Then 2 dots for the eyes, okay? One bright, one dark, one open, one closed. You can read them like that. Then the cone for the cylinder for the nose. Some just squiggles for the beards, there. But it's enough information. So it's solid and it's not solid again. We got these big, strong uses of color, as I said, with the pattern of the accordion. And then we got just like line and pattern there, something delicate, something that's not so substantial. Sometimes things seem to be almost engage our perception in such a strong way. They seem really solid, but in that same scene, there'll be parts which are hardly there, and they support each other. You come in and out with those different elements. How delicate the drawing is on the right-hand side in the dark there. They're there, we can just suggest them. They're in the shadows, they're just there, but they're delicate. The light isn't so strong on them, but they're still in our subconscious, slowly being drawn into our conscious. These artists are playing and understanding these things. Don't forget, this is a time where there's been people like Freud has been around talking about the conscious, subconscious, and the impact. There's been Carl Jung and people like that. These artists engage with all this information, try and bring it into their pictures, so that when we get an opportunity to key into it, we start to find it and enter into a deeper connection with what we're being shared. Now, there's a couple of versions here of the Picasso picture of his musicians. Painted a few versions of 3 musicians, 3 being iconic, of course, but you can see how this time he's taken real distinct characters in the piece. He showed the music itself, sense of because music is just drawing, isn't it? Diagrams, as we say, to hint at what needs to be played. Yes, we got the instruments as cutouts as well, which Matisse and people like that were heavily interested in. We got different kind of archetypes of the figures themselves, whether we got this robed figure, which could be an ancient monk or some dark figure like that. Got the harlequin, which often came in Picasso's pictures. The person that told the stories and sang to the community, often telling them what they didn't really want to hear, maybe some truths and the clown aspect. Piro on the left hand side, which again has got different connotations of the personality of the artist and the viewer. But in the background, you've got this strange dog and this wolf, shadow in there as well, echoing these things. And like I was talking earlier about the light and the dark in the scene, Picasso's showing these things. And often when you listen to a song, very interesting, songs which sound jolly, like the music's quite jaunty and upbeat, when you listen to lyrics, they're quite sad. So you get two aspects of them working into you and through you, and that they have a greater impact. And this is what Picasso's trying to show here. You can kind of engage with these things simultaneously, and they become stronger and stronger. There's another one here, using the same kind of motifs, moved them around in the scene now. Similar kinds of language, but this one's got a violin and a bow, of course. You see the top of the table there, all the things we've talked about in terms of things looking substantial, things looking transient, things looking see-through, transparent. They're all in it as well. But then the iconography of those different figures are there. So, things from the past, things from the present, things that tell us about life's joys and happiness, and vice versa, are all laid into the scene, and we get a chance to kind of experience all those things. As one or two more now. This is a slightly later one, so you can see Cubism, really kind of gone away. Picasso used it later and later and later, but you'll see it's still live and kicking now, really. This is in 1932. So this would have been in the kind of surrealist period. Picasso did take part in the first surrealist exhibition. So though he never really lined himself as a major surrealist, he was interested in it, this sense of the dream state or the psychological state of the subconscious, and what that information that puts into a picture and gives into an artwork that makes them particularly interesting. See him using the Cubist kind of dynamic here, where the head is tilted simultaneously two views. Got a profile view looking at the side of the nose and the mouth there, and we got a three-quarter view when we actually get to see the two high eyes, where the head is tilted to one side. And then we get flattening of space, we get objects of flat area which can come towards us and ones which go further afield. And then we get this white flow curve of this kind of ghostly, insubstantial kind of dream state that the artist is trying to portray. That and often is in all art, really. We can't escape it. We sometimes try to, we think we're going to try and make an image of a landscape in front of us, but we can't take away all the elements that have formed us as human beings and all the experiences we've all had. I suppose the best artists, the greatest artists, enabled more and more opportunities for different things to be seen and explored in their artwork, gives the viewers an insight into these different aspects. If we try and limit it down to one thing specifically, sometimes that has a big impact, but it's usually relatively short-lived. The strongest art images and artists do seem to be able to multifunction, multi-level in their artworks, and gives us opportunity to explore a lot more. And then the political movement of the time, of course, living through these two wars, First World War and then leading up to the Second here, massive impact on these artists. As I said, our experience of everything that we have in the world is formed by what kind of environment we're in, the kind of ideologies, etc. And then as artists, we try and put them into our pieces. And of course, this is a famous Guernica, which was a protest painting against the bombing of that northern Spanish town by the Franco-backed fascist movement, really. Fascist movement, which we've always got to be aware of and always got to be kind of mindful of. and particularly, of course, we know what's going on as we speak. So this is going to have impacts on our interpretations, as impacts on the imagery that we portray. And Cubism is a great way of giving that opportunity to explore those different elements simultaneously, as you can see. Different light sources, different iconic images, it'd be the bull in Spanish, the pain and torture of what's happening in the scene. You've got this dream state. This image is something Salvador Dali used a lot. It's a kind of head which comes in and out of consciousness, if you like. It's a strange archetype, but we can't achieve or anything until we start to understand these different layering of what is happening to us in our journey, in our environment that we find ourselves in. And just being open, not all the time maybe, but just being open sometimes to these different dimensions will give us a deeper connection with what we're experiencing and what we're receiving in terms of these artworks. So all this information is being overlaid one on top of the other in this piece, leading up to this strong diagonal point, this strong triangle, which is this powerful energy force right in the center there. But the light is up the top here, which looks like an eye, which is, of course, shining out with the kind of angularity of a certain kind of force. Nothing subtle here in terms of Picasso was always about trying to shake up the viewer. It wasn't appeasing. And, if you like, Matisse was on the one side of joy and happiness and uplift in his work. Picasso is the shadow side in that respect, about waking people up to what potentially can happen. But we also know when we looked at Picasso, his early works, or all the way running through it, really, there was a deep sense of compassion in the artist. Did lots of, obviously, imageries of the dove image was from Picasso, his anti-war pictures, etc. But they were always at an edge, if you like. And I thought we'd just have a look at a couple of easy to produce Cubist pictures from more recent times. And there's a couple I found on the internet, going back to 2008, 15 years ago now. You can see the figure. This looks a little bit more decorative and like a, stained glass window, if you like, really. But it's got a cubisty kind of feel to it in terms of the flattening of the planes, the flow, the multi viewpoints in the piece, the circles, the squares, if you like. Or you can break your picture down to this kind of diagrammic process to create your image. One last one, 2020, I thought, something like that, very recent. So I said it's a contemporary way of using some of Cubist ideology. And social media woman, yes, well, that's very relevant, isn't it? Social media woman and man with their mobile phones. We've got the Picasso S looking straight at us, and then the profile simultaneously there, and the figure in the background as well, the head. You also see these little eyes, iconic eyes that you might see on Egyptian art, rhythmic kind of quality, but giving it a very modern twist in terms of the colors and the forms, but flattening, using colors and tone to create space, and an opportunity for us with the eyes on the main figure to come and focus on that main subject, or go into the background and focus on those eyes in the background. So move beyond, move into space, if you like, something a little bit more solid and something a bit more transparent. In this figure, head in the background, we see the eyes and nose and the mouth, but everything else is a transparent background. All things which the Cubists use, but in a maybe more simplistic, accessible way.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell notification.